Hello, and welcome to another episode of Solipsist Watched. I'm your host, the Social Solipsist, and this week I watched The Thomas Crown Affair from 1968. Now, having just watched this, let me preempt this by saying there is a remake from 1999, and I am planning to watch that for next week's video. I honestly don't know at this point. My memory is muddled as to when and who suggested this film to me. And honestly, I also may have muddled which one I should watch. I should have been watching. It may have been the other one that was recommended. It may have been this one. But nevertheless, I watched the 1968 original first. It is, my usual to, even for when the remake is considered better, to watch this. And I don't know whether the remake is considered better, though there does seem to be some appreciation for it. Anyway, I digress. The Thomas Crown Affair is a mystery, drama, romance, thriller, crime movie thing. But in a lot of ways, it does not fit the mold for a lot of those sort of generalized genres. It stars Steve Mcqueen and Faye Dunaway, both of whom at the time were sort of stars in their own right. Perhaps not the biggest stars, but known characters. And they both do a reasonably good job, I think. They play their characters pretty well. I don't know that we've had any other films that I can think of on this show that have had either of them. Perhaps there has been and I've forgotten. But I don't tend to think either of them are generally particularly incredible actors, but they play certain roles, I think, perfectly acceptably. And in this particular case, they're both supposed to also be playing not necessarily people who are more there for their looks, but given that in cinema, often charisma is also sort of required to be transmitted through a visual medium, even if it's not necessary for the plot itself. When a character is meant to be charismatic, they tend to cast somebody pretty. And Steve McQueen and Faye Dunaway fit the bill for that. And together they work fine. I don't know that they have amazing chemistry, but it's an interesting dynamic. And it's not entirely one-dimensional either. Through the plot, they have a somewhat adversarial relationship, counter to what some of the posters appear like, which I'm actually not sure which poster I'm going to use on the screen right now, but some of the posters are aiming more towards a raunchy angle, showing, explicit cuts of them kissing and things like that. But it's an interesting dynamic because in the plot they are not supposed to be, they're supposed to be somewhat adversarial in various different ways. However, what's kind of fascinating about this as a crime film, or as talking about these other genres that I mentioned before, is it doesn't fit a lot of the bill. The first 20 to 30 minutes of the film fits a particular frame in terms of setting up who these characters are, the dynamic between them, and giving you sort of a picture of the shades of morality that are going on in the film. And the first 20 to 30 minutes are probably my favorite part of the whole film. In fact, I think they kind of vastly exceed the rest of the film. Unfortunately, the counterpoint to that, of course, is that, or the other part of that, is that the rest of the movie kind of isn't quite sure where it wants to be. The plot is kind of thin. it's, it's not a particularly new story. There's these romantic elements. There's these, charismatic criminal elements. There's this, cat and mouse game, adversarial relationship between criminals and law enforcement, and all these other things that are, sort of typical. They sometimes play out in interesting ways, but not that often. And it's hard to get really dragged in being really well invested in the story, I think. There are a combination of reasons. One is just that the characters themselves are, while charismatic, not very deep, not greatly interesting. Mostly what they have going for them, like Steve McQueen is playing, a sort of a rich playboy, and he plays it well, but there's not a lot of detail there. What it really seems to be expecting is that like the sort of playboy archetype is enough to get you invested in him and in other characters in certain ways, and to sort of suss out the dynamic there. The weird thing is, and I don't think this is not really a spoiler, is because he's not a good guy, because he is a criminal in some right. Normally that might, in a lot of narratives, that might lead to him being an anti-heroic character. But the plot is so thin that you never really get enough detail to make a really good decision. And while he's charming, gregarious, sort of the laid-back, cool guy, 60s and 70s movie archetype, like actual investment in his character and feelings of rooting for any particular group or side or individual is, I think, sort of, if you can land on one side or another, you're probably not going to have a really strong feeling that way. And it really sort of reduces the effectiveness of some of the other nice elements. A Shades of Grey crime film, as we've seen in some of the other things I've watched, is a thing that I generally like. But in this case, it's sort of there's like three parties and you're not really rooting for any of them. You might be rooting more for one and rooting against the other, another. And then there's, a third who might sort of be somewhere in the middle. But it doesn't really come together into something super compelling. Ultimately, it ends up not really being a crime film overall. And not a lot of the elements really serve to give it another out, like have it switch genres in a strong enough way to make you really care. And so the next 30 seconds, I'm just going to say something it's not really spoilery, but it's kind of like, it'll give you ideas. So from here, Faye Dunaway, to me, her character doesn't come through with that much. I'm not that invested in her, and the relationship between the two of them doesn't work that well for me, because I feel like she goes from being a hyper competent and very like intelligent and calculated character to sort of this like hopeless romantic who falls for some dumb shit, and they don't even give me a good reason to believe that she really likes him. The switch never really happens in a meaningful way. So by the end of the film, I'm not really believing it. Aside from all of that, there are some cinematic elements that I do really like. There's some really nice cinematography in general. Some sort of reflection shots and, through scenery and framed in unusual ways, and these other things that from time to time, and it's not consistent throughout the film at all, it's very inconsistent, are really nice. There's also some sort of like picture-in-picture and split screen insert shots that, again, in the first 30 minutes, I think are used really, really well, especially the first 15. Like, they look incredible. And I would say, even if you're not going to watch this film, maybe watch the first couple of scenes just to see what I'm talking about. Unfortunately, they then take those same techniques and apply them in places where it's totally inappropriate later in the film. One in particular that I'm thinking of is there's one scene where they have like a two pictures in picture that are almost identical size and showing the exact same thing. And there's just no reason for them to do it. There's one more where they're just doing like dozens of the same image. And it's like, it feels like they were attempting to do something artistically meaningful, but it doesn't really, it's not even like avant-garde. It's just sort of annoying. You're sort of looking at it going, I wish I could see that better. And they just ends up with cuts all over the place, and it's a bit of a mess. But really, in that first 20 minutes, they do a lot of nice stuff cinematically that I really appreciate, and smatterings throughout the rest of the film. The style is very sort of 50s, 60s, with sort of like edging into both the like crime worlds and police procedural worlds, and also sort of the high class millionaire type of area as well, that gives you some nice contrasts in terms of the visuals, and reminds you who the sides are that are fighting in this or at conflict here. And likewise, there are a few scenes of more substantial poverty, and like giving you ideas of what some of the what normal people live like as well, which is, I think, used pretty effectively. And unfortunately, it's not used super well in terms of storytelling. There's a bunch of squandered opportunities in there, but I appreciate what the cinematographer was working with there. Likewise goes for the costuming and stuff. It kind of runs the gamut, but it's a nice visual. There's some visual flair there that I appreciate. Yeah, overall, like, the tone of the film doesn't really work that well for me. It's a bit too muddled. It's a bit too meandering and without like a clear purpose. There are scenes of like sort of narrative climax and fall and climax again, but they don't really hit the way I think they want it to because of tonal switches earlier on. It's just sort of messy. I don't know if it necessarily, I don't think this would take a lot to salvage. Unfortunately, I think you would lose some of the artistry of it by tightening up some of the narrative. But there are a few too many like montages and other sort of extended scenes of trying to get you to feel a certain way about a group of characters or a scene that's going on, that don't really contribute substantially to the plot. Overall, I wouldn't say don't watch this if you're already interested. I would say probably if you are interested at all in what I was talking about before, like the first 20 minutes is pretty fantastic, and I really appreciate that alone. But don't necessarily feel compelled to watch the whole thing, I guess. It really sort of peters out by the end. Like I said, my intention now is to watch the remake from '99, which has Pierce Brosnan in Steve McQueen's role, which I believe my understanding is it's pretty well regarded. But we're going to find out. It's been a little while since I watched a movie with Pierce Brosnan in a primary role, and it's been quite a few years since he's been sort of the leading man type of character. He's getting up there now. I think he's probably well into his 60s. Anyway, Holy shit, 99 was 22 years ago? Oh my god. All right. Well, now that I'm feeling old, thank you guys for watching another episode of Solipsist Watched. I've been your host, the Social Solipsist, and I will see you guys next time.